Have you ever felt alone in a crowded room? All you can hear is the vague murmuring of the people around you while you sit alone in silence with your thoughts. To me, this is what social media feels like. I'm watching tens of thousands of people scream into the void, and I don't want to join them. Yet here I am making this video. As someone who struggles with mental illness, I am very wary of social media and its purposefully addictive nature. These sites were designed to hold your attention through the notification system and to cause a dopamine response to hold your attention for hours at a time. The problem is that it works too well. Some people are so absorbed by their various social medias that it ends up replacing their social life altogether. Enter in the newest study out of the University of Pittsburgh. This was a 4-year study of young people ages 19 to 32 with a sample size that was deemed to represent 97% of the U.S. young adult population. This was a comprehensive study about how social media use impacts perceived social isolation. Social isolation comes in two forms, subjective and objective. Objective being the actual lack of social ties, which does not necessarily mean you feel isolated and alone. Subjective is the feeling of isolation without actually being disconnected. This study focused on the subjective rather than the objective and was called perceived social isolation from this explanation forward. This perception can lead to obesity, mental illness, and even death in extreme cases. Link to the study itself in the description down below. I came across this study while listening to NPR's 1A, a radio show hosted by Joshua Johnson that covers a variety of topics, all relating back to speech. Mr. Johnson was interviewing the lead scientist, Dr. Brian Primick, about the study. Link to the episode, as well as a short article written by NPR in the description. This really caught my attention because I am 23 and I was born and raised right in the birth of widespread social media use. I was born at a time when MySpace existed and saw the rise of Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram. This put me right in the sweet spot between not being completely plugged in, but also not being left behind. What makes my look at social media different than others is that I am the rare 20-something that doesn't have a smartphone or a large social media presence. The survey was focused on the specific social media platforms Facebook, Twitter, Google+, YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Pinterest, Tumblr, Vine, Snapchat, and Reddit. Of these platforms, I am active on YouTube, obviously, the Twitter of the same name, and any other accounts that I've created in my younger years have since been abandoned. I feel like I shouldn't have everything online because I get sucked into social media use so easily. Anytime I end up on my Twitter, YouTube, or Facebook, which is hardly ever, I find myself stuck on these websites for 4 hours at a time. This has created my consciousness of something that could affect my brain and how I perceive the world around me. As I've been told since I was a child, life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it. I really want to understand why somebody would put their lives out in the world without this wariness of their behavior getting affected by a company. Currently, with all the scandals coming out about our data and the privacy issues with these companies, I wonder if the healthy people who got sucked into using social media are concerned about how much of their lives they put out. When the privacy scandals came out, I was not worried as I don't have a very large presence. I think it was my consciousness of my mental illness, knowing that I can be easily manipulated and it might cause an unhealthy reaction. Therefore, my social media presence is small. This personal bias is what drew me to this study when I heard about it on NPR. To really delve into how perceived social isolation affects the human body, we need to have a short biology lesson. As we all learn in science class, humans have this blueprint called DNA. This is all the instructions for our cells to do their jobs depending on their location in our bodies. For example, you would not want cells with liver instructions in your eyes. So that leads to the question of how do cells differentiate? Well, there are proteins and methyl groups in the nucleus that turn different genes on and off so that the correct genes are expressed. This is called gene expression, and the study of it is called epigenetics. This gene expression changes depending on age, environment, lifestyle, and disease. This is not your DNA changing. This is a change in how your DNA is read by the body. The physical traits expressed by your cells is called your phenotype, while the DNA itself is called the genotype. Gene expression causes a change in your phenotype, not your genotype. For example, in this study, perceived social isolation is believed to cause epigenetic changes, creating the self-destructive behaviors outlined in my introduction. Well, how does social media use come into play? The next thing you must understand is how to measure perceived social isolation. Luckily for the researchers, the National Institutes of Health created a system called Patient-Reported Outcomes Measuring Information System, or PROMIS. This system involves surveyed persons to rate several I feel statements on a scale of 1 to 5, which is then given to the researchers. Social media use was measured using time and frequency of platform use per week. Now, this is where we get out of my comfort zone, and I beg you to look at the survey and not just take my word for it. A bunch of statistical analysis was done to adjust for many variables to create one independent and two dependent variables, which they put into a logistic regression, which was used to examine the association between perceived social isolation and social media use. Now that bullshit is out of the way, let's talk about results and conclusions. In the results, the researchers classified the perceived social isolation as low, medium, and high. Of the participants, 42, 31, and 27% of them felt perceived social isolation, respectively. I have included the complicated charts that were supplied with the study for your viewing pleasure. The average time spent on the platforms was 31 minutes with an average of 30 visits per week. This puts the total time of the average study participant on social media platforms to 930 minutes a week. There was also a correlation found between the incidence of perceived social isolation and the amount of time spent. For example, those who do spend very little time on social media generally had low PSI, while those who frequented these sites had high PSI. It was found that if you were in a relationship, you would most likely have low PSI, as well as those making more than $30,000 annually. When it came to the researchers' conclusions in the paper, it was immediately stated that even though this is a comprehensive study, the correlation and causation are not explained by the data alone. There are many possibilities as to why these two behaviors are related. It could be that socially isolated people turn to social media to supplement in-person interaction, or use social media so much that they end up developing PSI. There is no definitive conclusion to draw, but something to keep in mind. In my opinion, as someone on the internet, I think that it might be a little bit of both, where one feeds the other and becomes a cycle that can quickly spiral out of control. Just like with everything else in life, moderation is key. It feels like if you have the most followers on the most platforms, you get to wear that as a badge of honor. In the inverse, the people like me also wear their lack of these things also as a badge of honor. I guess it depends on how much Black Mirror you've watched. In the spirit of this video and the aforementioned show, linked below is a funny video about a high social media user dating someone like me. I hope you found this valuable and maybe a little entertaining. Please leave me a comment on what you would like me to cover next, or if you have any questions. All links are in the description. This is Frantic Prayer signing off.